The letter came on a Thursday in October. It was thin. It had a return address from a company called Cardinal Asset Recovery, LLC, with an office suite number in Charlotte, North Carolina. Henry Aldridge brought it in from the rusted mailbox at the end of his gravel drive and set it on the kitchen table next to his coffee. He read the first paragraph standing up. He sat down for the second. The letter informed him that Cardinal Asset Recovery, LLC, was the assigned holder of a defaulted mortgage instrument originally executed in 1968 against the property at 4419 County Road 12, Greene County, Georgia, in the principal amount of $8,400. The letter further informed him that the instrument had been reactivated under a recent acquisition of distressed paper assets from a defunct savings and loan, and that the current balance owed, including statutory interest accrued over 58 years, was $487,316. The letter gave him 30 days to remit payment in full or to surrender the property. It was signed by a name with a title underneath: Lindsay Marchetti, Senior Recovery Officer. Henry read it twice. Then he set it down on the table and looked out the window at the pecan grove his grandfather had planted in 1947. The trees were 60 feet tall. The grass underneath them was still green for October. A barn cat sat on the porch step washing its paw. Henry was 74 years old. He had lived on this land his entire life. He had never in his life heard of Cardinal Asset Recovery, LLC. He had never in his life heard of an unpaid mortgage from 1968. His grandfather had died in 1971. His father had died in 1996. The property had passed to Henry as the only son. He had paid the property taxes every year for 30 years. He had a folder in a filing cabinet with every receipt. He picked up the phone and called the number printed at the bottom of the letter. A woman answered on the second ring. She was polite. She confirmed the file number. She said that the loan had been originated by the Greene County Savings and Loan in November of 1968, that the last recorded payment had been in March of 1969, and that the loan had been reclassified as performing under their acquisition. She said that documentation was available upon written request. She said the 30 days had begun on the date the letter was mailed. Henry asked her how a loan from 1968 could be active now. She said it had been preserved under the original instrument's terms, which had no statute of limitations clause. She said she was sorry. She did not sound sorry. She sounded the way people sound when they have already finished the conversation in their heads. His name was Henry Aldridge. He was 74 years old. He lived on 186 acres in Greene County, Georgia, 3 miles outside the town of Union Point, on land that had been in his family since 1923, when his grandfather Marvin Aldridge had bought the original 80 acres from a cotton broker in Greensboro for $1,400 and a mule. Marvin had built the house with his own hands in 1925. His son Cale, Henry's father, had been born in the front bedroom in 1928 and had died in the same room in 1996. Henry had been born in that bedroom too, in 1951, and he had taken over the farm in his early 40s when Cale's lungs had started to fail. He had been told one thing about the land when his father handed it to him. Cale had stood on the porch with his hand on the porch rail and said, "Don't ever borrow against it. Not for anything. Not for any reason. Your grandfather paid for this in cash and he meant for it to stay that way." Henry had given his word. He had kept it for 30 years. The pecan grove Marvin had planted in 1947 ran along the south side of the property. The barn his father had rebuilt in 1962 sat on the east side, against the tree line. The graveyard was on the small rise behind the house, fenced with iron rail his grandfather had hammered out at the forge that used to stand where the equipment shed stood now. There were 11 headstones in the graveyard. Marvin and his wife Lila were under the dogwood at the back. Cale and Henry's mother, Ruth, were beside them. There was a smaller stone for Henry's wife, Beth, who had died in 2017 of cancer at the age of 63. Beth had been a librarian in Greensboro for 31 years. She had organized the family papers in the year before her diagnosis, when she had been feeling well and the weather had been good, and they had spent 2 weekends in the attic going through everything Cale had left behind. She had labeled the boxes by year. She had typed the labels on a label maker she had bought at a hardware store in Athens for $19. The boxes were stacked in the southwest corner of the attic, against the chimney brick. Beth had told Henry once, on a Sunday afternoon in October of 2016, "If anything ever comes up about the land, the answers are in those boxes. Your daddy kept everything." Henry had not opened a single one of them since she had died. Cardinal Asset Recovery LLC was not a person. It was a Delaware-registered limited liability company with a registered agent in Wilmington and a mailing address in Charlotte. It had been formed in March of 2024. Its parent entity was a portfolio fund called Latimer Capital Holdings, which specialized in the acquisition of distressed and dormant debt instruments from failed financial institutions. The strategy was simple. Latimer purchased portfolios of old paper from FDIC receiverships and bankruptcy estates at fractional cents on the dollar, then ran title searches against the underlying collateral to determine which loans were attached to property that still had value. The viable claims were assigned to subsidiary recovery firms, which pursued collection through letters, phone calls, and, where the targets did not respond, foreclosure proceedings in the relevant county courts. The firm had filed 211 such actions across 7 southern states in the previous 18 months. It had succeeded in 184 of them. The recovery officer assigned to the Aldridge file was Lindsay Marchetti. She was 31 years old. Her bonus structure was tied to recovered value per file. She had spent 14 minutes on Henry's case before the letter went out, and she had not looked at his file again after the initial review. There was no reason to. The model said the property was worth $740,000 at current market, and that the holder was a 74-year-old widower with no listed dependents. The model said it would close. Henry called his lawyer the next morning. The lawyer was a man named Wendell Pace, 61 years old, who had handled Beth's estate and who had been Henry's father's lawyer before that. Pace read the letter in his office with Henry sitting across from him. He said the claim was nonsense on its face. He also said that nonsense claims still had to be answered, and that the firm sending the letter clearly believed they had something, or they would not have spent the postage. He asked Henry whether his grandfather or father had ever taken out a loan against the property. Henry said no. Pace asked whether he was certain. Henry said his father had told him, on the porch, the day he handed over the farm, that the land had been bought in cash and was never to be borrowed against. Pace nodded. He said, "That's good, Henry, but I need to see whatever paperwork your father kept." Henry said the paperwork was in the attic. Pace said, "Then we're going to the attic." The attic of the Aldridge house was reached by a pull-down ladder in the hallway between the kitchen and the back bedroom. The ladder was the same ladder Cale had installed in 1979. The attic itself was floored with pine planks his grandfather had cut from the back 40 in 1924. The chimney brick rose through the center of the space. Beth's boxes were stacked against the southwest face of the chimney, 10 of them, each one labeled in her precise, small handwriting with a year range: 1923 to 1935, 1936 to 1945, 1946 to 1955, and so on, up through 1996, the year Cale died. There was an 11th box, smaller, labeled simply, "Property Deeds, all years." Henry climbed the ladder first. Pace followed, slower, breathing hard at the top. They knelt in front of the boxes. Henry lifted the lid of the deed box. Inside were folders, organized by transaction. Original purchase, 1923. Survey, 1924. Tax assessments by decade. Improvements, 1947. And, near the back, a folder labeled in Cale's handwriting, in pencil. Title, Free and Clear, 1962. Henry pulled the folder out. He opened it on the floor of the attic in the light from the single bulb. Inside was a single document, 3 pages long, printed on thick paper that had yellowed at the edges. It was a recorded title certification, filed with the Greene County Clerk of Superior Court on August 14, 1962, certifying that the property at 4419 County Road 12 was held in fee simple by Marvin Aldridge, free and clear of all liens, mortgages, and encumbrances of any kind, and that all prior recorded interests had been satisfied as of that date. The certification was stamped, signed, and sealed by the clerk of court, a man named Ernest Pruitt, whose signature was visible in faded blue ink. Stapled to the back of the certification was a second document. It was a satisfaction of mortgage, recorded the same day, releasing the property from a $2,200 agricultural improvement loan that Marvin had taken out in 1958 and paid off in 1962. The satisfaction was filed at Book 47, page 213 of the Greene County Deed Records. Pace looked at the document. He looked at Henry. He said, "Henry, this title certification predates the loan they're claiming by 6 years." Henry said, "I don't follow." Pace said, "The loan they're claiming was originated in 1968. This document, filed in 1962, certifies that the property was free and clear of all encumbrances. There's no record of any 1968 loan in this folder. There's no record of any 1968 loan in the county registry, or they would have cited it in their letter. They didn't cite a book and page. They cited a loan number from a defunct savings and loan. They're claiming an instrument that, as far as the county is concerned, doesn't exist." He paused. He said, "Henry, your grandfather did exactly what your father told you he did. He paid for everything, and he made sure it was on the record." They climbed down from the attic with the folder. Pace took it back to his office and made certified copies. He filed a request the same afternoon for a complete title search of the Aldridge property, covering the period from 1923 to the present. The search came back 5 days later. There was no mortgage filed against the property in 1968. There was no lien, no encumbrance, no recorded interest of any kind between the satisfaction filed in 1962 and the present day. The property had been free and clear for 63 years. Pace filed a formal demand on Cardinal Asset Recovery LLC, requesting the original instrument they were claiming, including the loan documents, the recording information, and the chain of title for the assigned debt. Cardinal's response, when it came, was a one-page letter from a different lawyer at a different firm, asserting that the loan instrument was held in their files under the original loan number and that further documentation would be produced in the course of foreclosure proceedings. The letter advised Henry to seek counsel. Pace filed a quiet title action in Greene County Superior Court on November 12, 2025. He attached the 1962 certification, the 1962 satisfaction of mortgage, and the title search showing no recorded interest after 1962. He requested expedited consideration on the grounds that the defendant was actively threatening foreclosure on a property to which it had no demonstrable claim. The hearing was scheduled for December 18th. The courtroom was on the second floor of the Greene County Courthouse in Greensboro. It was a small room, wood-paneled walls, an American flag in the corner, a Georgia state flag beside it. The bench was carved oak. The judge was the Honorable Marvin Tate, 67 years old, 22 years on the bench, who had grown up in Greene County and who had known Henry's father by name. He entered the courtroom at exactly 9 a.m. He had read both filings the night before. Cardinal Asset Recovery's attorney arrived first. He was a man from Atlanta named Philip Renner, 44 years old, in a charcoal suit. 2 associates accompanied him, both in their late 20s, both carrying matching black leather folders. They sat down at the defendant's table and laid out their materials. Henry walked in alone with Wendell Pace. He was wearing a dark blue suit Beth had bought him in 2014 for a wedding. He carried no folder. The 1962 title certification was in a manila envelope on Pace's table. Renner spoke first. He spoke for 22 minutes. He outlined Cardinal's acquisition of the loan portfolio, the chain of assignment from the original Greene County Savings and Loan through the FDIC receivership, through 2 intermediate purchasers, to Latimer Capital Holdings, and finally, to Cardinal Asset Recovery. He cited statutory provisions on the perpetual enforceability of recorded mortgage instruments. He acknowledged the 1962 certification, but argued that it predated the alleged 1968 loan and was therefore irrelevant to the matter at hand. He requested that the quiet title action be dismissed and that Cardinal be permitted to proceed with foreclosure under the original instrument. He sat down. Pace stood up. He said 3 sentences. He said, "Your Honor, the defendant has produced no original instrument. The defendant has produced no recording reference in the Greene County deed records. The defendant has produced a loan number from a defunct institution and asks this court to treat it as equivalent to a recorded mortgage." He sat down. Judge Tate looked at the file in front of him. He picked up the 1962 certification and the 1962 satisfaction of mortgage. He read them. The room waited. He set them down. He looked at Philip Renner and he said, "Counselor, can you produce a recording reference for the 1968 instrument?" Renner stood. He said the original recording had been in the records of the Greene County Savings and Loan, which had been dissolved, and that the firm was working to reconstruct the recording history. Tate said, "Counselor, in the state of Georgia, a mortgage that has not been recorded in the county where the property sits is not enforceable against the property. You know that. Your client knows that. The recording reference is the entire question. Either you have one or you don't." Renner said the firm was working to obtain it. Tate said, "Then you don't have one." He turned to the file. He said, "I am granting the plaintiff's quiet title action. I'm quieting title in favor of Henry Aldridge, free and clear of any claim by Cardinal Asset Recovery LLC or its successors or assigns. I am further finding that the defendant's letter of October 9, 2025, constituted a threat of foreclosure absent any colorable claim, and I am awarding the plaintiff damages in the amount of $186,000 for slander of title, attorney's fees, and emotional distress. The defendant has 30 days to remit. This matter is closed." He brought down the gavel. Henry did not move for a moment. Then he stood up. Pace shook his hand. They walked out of the courtroom together. Henry drove home alone in his truck. The drive took 41 minutes. He parked at the end of the gravel drive and walked past the rusted mailbox without looking at it. He walked up to the house, set his hat on the counter, and walked out the back door and up the slope behind the house, past the equipment shed, to the iron-railed fence around the family graveyard. He opened the gate. He walked to the dogwood at the back. The grave under the dogwood belonged to his grandfather, Marvin Aldrich, born 1898, died 1971. The headstone was simple and granite and had been there for 55 years. Henry stood in front of it for a long time. The wind moved through the dogwood. A crow called from the pecan grove. Henry took off his hat. He held it in both hands. He said, "You took care of it, Granddaddy. You took care of all of it. I hope you know." He stood there a while longer. Then he put his hat back on, closed the gate behind him, and walked back down to the house. Some men leave money behind. Some leave a name. The ones who leave a piece of paper, filed in the right place at the right time, leave something better than both. They leave a foundation that doesn't move when men in suits arrive 60 years later to test it. If you've made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person this channel is for. Next time, a 79-year-old widow in Tennessee, a county line dispute that started in 1958, and a hand-drawn map her father kept in a Folgers coffee can in the back of the pantry. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Paste your script.